So, some of you may be looking at the title and the length of this video and already think you've been clickbaited, but let me explain. Now that I've gotten a couple of video essays under my belt, I decided to do what all the other big video essayists do and challenge myself. This has never backfired for anyone ever, and there's no way it will backfire for me. For those of you that have been here for a bit, you may have noticed that I make fairly long videos, so I thought, what if I tried to make them shorter? So in this video, I'm going to talk about a game for 5 minutes or less and do my best job at critiquing it. Then, like the person I am, I decided to throw out the entire reason for the concept and put 5 games in one video. So, 5 games, I have 5 minutes for each. I'll have a timer in the top right and chapters in the progress bar so you can skip around. Linear narrative-driven games are some of my favorites of all time. Well, at least most of the time. I love The Last of Us, 2018's God of War, and the Uncharted series, just to name a few. But there's one that I've had my eye on for a long time, and I think it's time I finally take a crack at it. The Tomb Raider series has a long history, and figuring out which one to start with was a bit challenging, but after much debate, I finally decided to go with the one that just felt right. That's right, I'm sure most of you have guessed it, my first ever Tomb Raider game is... Lara Croft Go. And that's not a joke. Well, it is, but I've never played any of the Tomb Raider games, and the first one I decided to play is Lara Croft Go. While I do actually have my eyes on the Tomb Raider series, for this video, I just so happened to see that I owned it, and I was curious. Now for this game, and for most of the other ones in this video, I went in completely blind. I knew it had something to do with the Tomb Raider series, and that I owned it because of the humble monthly subscription I had a while back, but that was about it. So as it turns out, Lara Croft Go is a phone game. I probably should have pieced that together considering it has the same naming style as Pokemon Go and Hitman Go, but what can I say, I'm an idiot. So I played this phone game on my computer and honestly, it wasn't that bad. It wasn't fantastic by any stretch of the imagination, but I did actually have some fun with it. Lara Croft Go is a turn-based puzzle game where you play on a sort of board game-like arena with one of the main constraints being that you can only go to certain spaces. Everything is about timing. Events will happen simultaneously with your movement, but time stops when you aren't moving, so often the gameplay is you trying to time events correctly, whether it be a boulder, an enemy, or a trap. One thing Lara Croft Go actually does well is the fact that the puzzles are actually puzzles. They vary in difficulty, but every single one requires some thought from you to figure it out. The downside to this, however, is that trial and error becomes the main source of progression. Because of this, oftentimes you won't be able to complete a level for the first time simply by looking at it. You need to actually attempt the level, see where you went wrong and what caused your untimely death, and use that information on your next try. This sort of progression isn't bad in principle, and I wouldn't even say it's bad at all in execution, but it can be frustrating at times when you don't understand a puzzle. That being said, this is still a phone game, so challenge is something that is avoided at all costs, or at the very least, undone with a simple push of a button. There is a show solution button that literally just shows you the steps you need to take in order to solve a puzzle. I think some sort of hint system would have been better than outright giving the answers, but I was thankful for the option when I got stuck, because I didn't want to sit there confused for longer than I needed to on Lara Croft Go. My pride can only take so much. While the style of puzzle solving may not be for everyone, I do think something else this game excelled at was its introduction of in-game mechanics. And if I'm being honest, the implementation here is something that a lot of bigger, more expensive titles could learn from. Every time a new mechanic is introduced, the complexity of its uses grows slowly over the course of the game, and new and old mechanics are mixed together, so not only do the puzzles become more intricate, but you also feel smart as you solve them. This allows for you to get into a sort of rhythm, because for the most part, any confusion within a level comes simply from the puzzle itself, not from the individual pieces of the puzzle. While I'm here, I want to take a moment to mention that the soundtrack and the sound design are both surprisingly well done. Like, I'm not really sure why they are both this good. Who is going to be paying attention to them in a phone game? Well, besides me, obviously. I also think that the art style is quite charming. It's very similar to Air's aesthetic. Is there a name for this specific art style? I'm not too sure, but I like it. With that all being said, and with the clock ticking down, it's time to get down to the criticism, which honestly boils down to the very nature of its existence. This is made to be played on phones, and it very much feels like it. Swiping with your mouse never stops feeling awkward, and I can't help but wonder why it was even ported to the PC in the first place, other than the obvious capitalistic reasons. Not only that, but it literally costs more to play on the computer. It's $9.99 on Steam, $5.99 on the Google Play Store, and $4.99 on the Apple Store. Why is there a difference in price at all? especially between the different phone stores. That feels a bit scummy to me. I also can't help but feel like it being tied to the Tomb Raider series is just a way to make sales. The atmosphere feels pretty generic, and honestly, if the player model wasn't Lara Croft, then it would literally have no connection to the Tomb Raider series. That being said, I really do like the approach they took to the different level themes. I especially like the one with the dragon boss. It felt really unique. At the end of the day, I had a pretty good time playing, and I look back on it very fondly, although I might be slightly influenced by the fact that I tried one of my new favorite teas for the first time while playing it, association and all that psychological jazz. But I honestly don't feel comfortable recommending it on Steam for $10. Don't get me wrong, there's a ton of content, but from experience that should have never even existed on the platform in the first place, a $5 price hike just feels too steep. If what you've seen so far looks interesting and you like puzzle games, I'd recommend getting this on your smartphone. I bet it'll feel a little bit more natural to play. So I probably won't even need 5 minutes to talk about Crazy Machines 3. If I had to boil it down into one sentence, it would be this. Crazy Machines 3 is like if you took a Rube Goldberg machine, you know those crazy domino things you made in high school, and stripped away all of the fun, creativity, and enjoyment of making them, and instead replaced it with a bunch of frustration, sadness, and a fun coat of paint. So I didn't like this, and there are a couple of reasons for that, but first let me tell you the premise. There are some crazy machines where you need to fill in specific parts of the machine to complete it. You are given the specific parts, and you need to figure out where each of them goes in order to complete whatever task the machine is supposed to complete. And that's pretty much it. Now here comes the first issue. The objectives of the machines can be a bit vague when communicated to the player, so starting off it can be a bit hard to even tell what you're trying to do in the first place. The second issue is that the solutions are extremely specific and sensitive. If you place a part in a slightly different position than the solution intended, the machine will not work. So it becomes this weird trial and error puzzle where you have the specific parts in the right place, but you need to make these minute adjustments in order to actually complete it. Not only that, but the solutions allow for almost zero creativity. Whereas trial and error worked for Lara Croft Go because as you tried things and they didn't work out, you learned things and got closer and closer to the solution each time, with Crazy Machines, it simply feels like you just didn't do what was intended. Which is part of the reason that this just didn't work for me. Games like Polybridge are fun in my opinion because of the sandbox nature of the puzzle. Building a bridge to get this car across is the objective, and you are given a set of tools to complete it. Now, if your bridge doesn't work, it's not because it wasn't the exact solution the developer intended, it's because your bridge didn't work. The onus is on you, the player, not the puzzle. The issue is compounded by the fact that each level of Crazy Machines has different tools and items to use each time. They are rarely the same. So you aren't learning how to use these materials like in Polybridge or in Lara Croft Go, but instead it's a new set of things to learn with each puzzle. This ends up being tedious, especially since what each thing does is communicated terribly. Let's take an example machine here. This is only the 4th level. Notice, you can't place items on top of other items in the puzzle as it gives you a flashing red warning. So you have 3 items. You have a punching glove, a wooden plank, and some metal rods. I spent probably an hour or so on this puzzle, and I gave up at one point and tried it again later, and I never solved it. Here are a few of my attempts. And here is the solution. As you can see, I knew the solution, but the issue was that it didn't place each item in exactly the place the game had intended for it to work, which is heavily frustrating when you are not the one making anything. If I was the one making the machines, this would be completely different, but I'm just supposed to be filling in the holes, and I did that correctly, but I still never got the machine to work. The only time I had fun was when I tried some of the mini games, or when I played community-made maps. There's a surprising amount of content in Crazy Machines 3, most of which I hated, but it still does get some credit for the amount of stuff in it. The thing I enjoyed the most was this car game where bombs and a few other things were dropped from the sky, and you controlled 3 cars of different colors simultaneously. You had to get each car to its respective color while not dying. It was pretty fun. There were not a large amount of community maps, but the ones I played were okay. There was a pinball-like game, a cannon puzzle, and some sort of domino effect challenge where I actually had the most amount of control. Now, there is a significant possibility that I simply didn't like this game because I'm a moron. The reviews are extremely positive, with lots of them raving about the level of intellectual creativity involved in playing, but that was not my experience. It's normally $10 on Steam, but goes on sale often. All I can say is that I got this game for free, and I still feel like I paid too much. I want to think back to a simpler time in my life, back before I became overly critical of the media I consumed and before I became an asshole about it. When I was younger, I loved snowboarding games, despite the fact that my only experience with actual snowboarding scarred me for life. There was something simple and calming about gliding down a pure white slope with a friend in the background, chatting about anything that came to mind. Then suddenly, when I needed them most, they vanished. Now, nearly a decade later, I discovered a new snowboarding game, a game named Steep. And it's pretty good. Steep is a modern snowboarding title in an era where legitimate sports games seem to be dying out. Looking at you, EA. So not only is Steep a refreshing reminder of what the genre can bring, it's also a proof of concept. Sports games don't have to be cash grabs. I discovered this game about halfway through last year, and let me tell you, it's like a hole in my life has been filled and I didn't even realize it was there. Steep has a gigantic open world for you to play in, and it looks gorgeous. Notice how I didn't say explore there, because this isn't that kind of experience. There are 4 sections of gameplay that aren't hidden behind DLC. You can snowboard or ski down mountains in specific tracks with a few different game modes available. You could do a race where there are certain checkpoints and the person who gets to the end first wins, or you could do tricks to see who can rack up the most amount of points before the end, just to name a few. You could also just ride around the mountain without playing any of the specific modes. Then there's the regular wingsuit and the rocket wingsuit. For the rocket wingsuit, you have to go around a series of checkpoints, and the first to get to the end wins. As for the regular wingsuits, you have to glide down a mountain while getting as close as possible to the ground for points. Having this variety of modes keeps Steep from ever feeling repetitive. If you ever find yourself getting bored of a certain mode, just switch to a different one. I think perhaps the greatest praise I can give is simply the fact that it's so much fun to play. It's been a while since I've just had fun with a game. That might be a little bit sad, but I think it has a little bit to do with modern games as a whole. There are no builds to consider, no complex decisions to be made, and no story to follow along with. It's just you and some buddies sliding down a mountain, having a blast.
Freestyler. What the fuck?
That's rough. That's rough, buddy.
And that's something that is really important. It captures that feeling from my childhood I mentioned earlier. But I do think that Steep is nowhere near as fun or as interesting without friends. If I were to criticize it at all, which would be difficult because my brain would turn off for the most part while I was playing, everything would be minor. I had a few technical issues while playing. For some reason, it would randomly stutter for like 3 to 5 seconds and then resume like normal. My friends and I also couldn't find a good way to disable the in-game mics, so we had to mute each other each time we played, or we'd be hearing double. I'm also still not 100% sure how tricks work. I know most of the basics, but I'm not sure how much more complex tricks work or how to get more points from tricks. I also have absolutely no idea how to land properly. That could just be being bad though. But honestly, I think that's it. Every other aspect of it is good or great. The customization system is refreshing because you get to progress through it just from playing. It's strange to think of that being a positive in today's world, but it is truly a breath of fresh air. The soundtrack is phenomenal. I literally can't praise it enough. It's fantastic and makes every run feel hype. I can't play most of it for you here because a lot of it is copyrighted songs, but trust me, if you get it, you'll know. Also, when you do a big jump, the music dynamically fades out when you take off and comes back in as you land. It's a super neat design choice that makes every jump feel wild. Also, when you crash, it slows down for a second and speeds back up as you do. It really completes the entire experience. I guess one other thing I could say, which isn't as much of a criticism of Steep as it is of a lot of titles today, is that only 4-player co-op feels just a bit too small. I don't have a crazy amount of friends or anything, but it's not uncommon to have 5 people in a Discord server, which kind of makes Steep not an option. I have the feeling I would play it a bunch more if there were 6 to 8 people lobbies at a time. Now, I wouldn't say this is revolutionary, but it does everything it sets out to do well, and honestly, I would highly recommend it to anyone who enjoys these type of games. Get a couple of buddies together and shred the gnarm, my dude! God, I can't believe I just said that. It's $30 on Steam, which I don't think is too much, and if you want to wait for a sale, it happens pretty often. The Long Dark is the best game I discovered in 2020, and I think that's mostly due to it being the exact kind of game I've been looking for a long time. I love survival games, but I always have major issues with every single one I play. Minecraft doesn't lean into its survival aspects enough, the forest and the raft are a bit too short on things to do, and Project Zomboid still hasn't released the goddamn animations update for co-op. So what makes The Long Dark stand out from a crowd? Well, first off, this is a legitimate survival game. A lot of popular titles in the genre generally have survival elements, but it's rarely actually the focus. But in The Long Dark, that is quite literally the only thing to do. The current objective is always survive. Not only that though, but the survival is extremely well fleshed out. The Long Dark demands your attention, or at the very least your consideration, because every decision you make, whether it's big or small, will have an impact on your run. And this is facilitated by all the various systems feeding into each other. You have 4 main needs you need to keep an eye on: food, water, fatigue, and warmth. These are all pretty much the only things you have to keep an eye on to survive besides your overall health, which can go down due to any one of these needs going down, or by taking damage from a wild animal attack or from a fall. Perhaps the best thing The Long Dark does is give every decision you make about the different needs have a pro and a con. If you wear warmer and higher quality clothes, you have to carry more, which will make your fatigue go down even faster. It's important to note here that your carry capacity is always lower than you need it to be to feel comfortable in taking care of all your needs. Back to the clothes. If you have good clothes, you can't carry as much food and water. Water is easy to make if you have fire supplies, but those also take up inventory space and take time. You also can't make fire in bad weather. If you don't wear warm clothes, then you can carry more food and water, but you can't stay outside as long, so you can't search for more supplies for as long either. You also need to keep up medical supplies, so that if you take a nasty fall or a bear decides to make you lunch, you can stay alive after. And that is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to resources. As stated, you need food, water, clothes, and medical supplies, but you also need things to start your fire: a starter, tinder, fuel, and if you want an accelerant. You'll need something to defend yourself with, a firearm of sorts perhaps. You'll need various tools to do certain types of jobs, sewing kits to fix your clothes, a hatchet to break down wood, etc., and various other items. If it's not clear already, you will not have the space for all of this, and so life becomes this question: do I really need this item? But that's not all. Resources will run out in a specific area, and that can either be the death of you, or you can get out ahead of the curve. But to do that, you need to plan when you travel somewhere new. You need to have enough food for the journey, water, fire starting supplies, and warm clothes, because now you don't have a warm house to hide inside of. Traveling to a new area is extremely difficult, and any number of things can go wrong. All it takes is for one bear to be in your way, and suddenly your entire trip is busted. I've lost a fair amount of runs to not being prepared enough to travel or from getting lost. This all leads to one of my personal favorite aspects: permadeath. I have this sort of weird fascination with permadeath because I like the feeling of everything I do matters. I get kind of sucked out of a game when I die and it's only a minor inconvenience at most. Dying should feel impactful. Obviously the issue is much more complicated for other titles, but because of the arbitrary nature of this video, I'll save that for another time. The Long Dark is about survival, and permadeath works perfectly for it. And there's a genuine sense of progression after each playthrough. On my first run I could barely survive for a day, but now I have a run where I've been alive for a couple of months. You get better at managing your resources, minimizing danger, and overall dealing with any situation. It's a rewarding experience, and the motivation to keep playing is totally internal as opposed to external. I think my main criticism of The Long Dark is its lack of an endgame. There are plenty of things to do: set up a base, level up the various survival skills through gameplay, which is a fantastic system by the way, and exploring, but there is no end goal that you're building to. It begins with survival and ends with survival, which is totally fine as it fits well with the theme and the overall atmosphere, but it does leave me with a sense of wanting more. After I get set up, have a base, plenty of food, good clothes, and I've leveled up my skills a fair amount, I find myself getting a bit bored because the sense of danger is gone. Now let me be clear, you are still in danger no matter how set up you get. Bears, for example, never stop being an unstoppable force, but that sense of urgency is gone. I kinda wish there was a system where you could escape, one that took an insurmountable amount of resources to make or do, or at least some kind of goal beyond survival. It could be to set up a legitimate sustaining system of agriculture, or to build a house, or something along those lines. Either way, I find myself missing some kind of structure in the endgame once the harshness of survival fades. Overall, I highly recommend this to anyone who likes the survival genre. This may be the best one I've ever played. I can't think of another one off the top of my head. It's $30 on Steam, and it's well worth it. Cyberpunk 2077 is actually one of the many reasons this video got delayed, which feels sort of poetic in a way. It's also poetic to talk about it in the video directly after The Last of Us Part 2 because in many ways they are sister games. Both were delayed, both had very shaky releases, and both are a testament to a need for fundamental change in the way games are developed. It seems my newsfeed for the past few months has been filled with news articles on top of news articles about how the developers were mistreated, how the crunch was too much, how they should have delayed the game for longer, and how unhappy they were with the entire experience. Which makes sense because for all the problems I had with The Last of Us Part 2, Game of the Year, are you shitting me? Being a technical failure is not one of them. Whereas The Last of Us Part 2 runs like butter but has a questionable story at best, Cyberpunk has a pretty good story but runs like dog shit. So for me, the question becomes whether or not the story is good enough to keep me coming back to play. It's not, at least for me. One of the reasons this video got delayed was because I wanted to make a full review on Cyberpunk, but honestly, I just kept avoiding playing it, which seems to be a general trend. According to one of the articles I mentioned earlier, the Cyberpunk player base dropped by 78% in its first month, which is pretty terrible. And that's a sentiment I've noticed in my friends as well. When it first dropped, everybody was talking about it, but now, no one is even playing it. My best friend, who has been hyped about this game for years, did a 24-hour live stream on day 1 and has not touched it since. So, full disclosure, I've only played about 10 hours, which for some automatically discredits my entire review, and that's totally fair, honestly. But I just couldn't bring myself to keep playing it, especially when I knew I had 50 plus hours left. That feeling is perhaps one of the biggest issues Cyberpunk has. Because Cyberpunk is not an unfun game, but it is a bad one. It runs terribly. I had to mess with 1,000 settings to get it to work properly in an FPS above 20, and it's still fucked up in the recording somehow. And I have a pretty decent gaming computer, which should have been able to run it fine. Not to mention the amount of bugs there are. It's almost laughable this was in development for 7 years and was supposed to release originally in April of 2020. It can't even run on the PlayStation 4 or the Xbox One, which is inexcusable. If it doesn't work on the console, don't sell it. Like, think back to the shit show that was Fallout 76. That didn't get pulled from any online stores, but Cyberpunk has been removed from the PlayStation Store, if that tells you anything. But perhaps I was poised to dislike Cyberpunk more than others. The Cyberpunk genre isn't one I have a particular interest in. The main reason it was on my radar in the first place was because I finally got around to playing The Witcher 3 back in early 2020 and was blown away by how much I loved it. In fact, my earlier statement about The Long Dark may have been a lie. The Witcher 3 would be my favorite game I discovered in 2020, but I'm not sure if it counts since I first played it in fall of 2019, then stopped for a period of time. So after I finished and I found out that Cyberpunk 2077 was made by the same developer, I was interested. I'm telling you this because for some, this is the biggest piece of Cyberpunk media released in a long time. From my understanding, it's a setting that doesn't get a whole lot of love. There are a handful of bigger titles like the Deus Ex series, but most of these types of games are smaller, or the setting is simply used as more of a backdrop like in the Black Ops series. So depending on how much you like the Cyberpunk genre, you may be able to look past the faults for the experience, because the atmosphere is extremely well done. From what I've seen, the world is very well thought out and very detailed. I do think Cyberpunk could have a redemption story. I think in a few months or a year it could pull a No Man's Sky and be exactly what was promised, and CD Projekt Red could be praised for their dedication to their product. But I do think this is a slippery slope. I would hate for the new norm to be unfinished games being released, then developers finishing it over the next year and getting a shit ton of praise for it. Regardless of the end outcome, we need to make sure developers know this is not an okay practice. Because not only was it not finished, but the developers were worked to the bone. A systemic change needs to be made to the way development is managed, or we will only hear more and more of these kinds of stories. More than I ever could, my best friend describes his feelings about Cyberpunk after his 24-hour live stream.
Pretty fun. The story is just leagues and leagues and leagues far above the general gameplay. The gameplay itself is super general. The gunplay is actually really it's really satisfying, I will say. The gunplay and the sound design is really good. But it's nothing special, unfortunately. But some parts of the system felt a little bland, like kind of empty. Like the bugs are pretty wild. It's I don't know. It was a bunch of it was okay.
I talked to him after the fact, and he told me that ultimately the game was disappointing, and I think that's honestly how a lot of people feel. More than anything, Cyberpunk seems to be lacking a soul. Hey everyone, just want to say thanks for watching. This is the unscripted outro. So the video is over, but I have a couple things I want to say to you guys. First off, I want to really apologize for how long it took for this video to come out. I kind of underestimated the difficulty of the format, and then also a couple of things in my personal life happened. Started a new job, and then obviously from behind the scenes, Cyberpunk releasing kind of put a bit of a wrench in my plans. Originally, The Long Dark and Cyberpunk weren't even the games I was going to talk about. I was going to talk about 2 different games, so a lot of switching up on my part. In terms of the video itself, I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. I think that the script is really solid. I think it's on par with The Last of Us Part 2, at least in terms of my writing. I think that the video I made, not the game, I should say. I also think that, I don't know, the video editing, I tried a little bit more visual gags for this one, and I'm not sure if they landed or not. It's always difficult for me to tell if the video that I'm editing itself, like the actual video that you're seeing, comes across as how I intend it to. So let me know in the comments what you think about that. In terms of the format itself, I'm not sure what my plans are with it. I enjoyed it, but it was a lot of work, and it was very difficult to write for 5 different games in such a short amount of time. So it took a lot of work. I think the result was really good. I really enjoyed the script, the final product, but for me, it's, is it worth it? So I'm not opposed to coming back and revisiting it if this is something that people enjoy, but I'm not necessarily itching to go back to it. I have a lot of other plans that don't involve this. So we'll see what happens in the future. I'm not saying one way or the other. For future stuff, I'm excited to tell you guys about this. So I'm going to be vague, but the next video, I'm already 75% done with the script. So assuming things don't get crazy, that video should not take very long to come out. It's a bit of a shorter video and a bit of a different video. So that's one of the reasons it's a little bit easier to come out. So that you'll hopefully see that in your sub feeds soon. I don't want to make promises on dates because last time I did, I looked like a clown. And then the next video beyond that is a project that I've wanted to work on for a while, and the stars finally aligned, and I'm going to be starting working on that. I'm in pre-production right now. I'm going to start actually working on that like this week. So I'm really excited for that. Look out for that. I'm not going to give you any spoilers, but it's one thing I wanted to do when I first started the channel. It's one of the ideas I had. And so here we are about a year later, finally going to start doing that idea. I'm really excited for that. Without further ado then, I think, one more thing I want to say. I'm really, thank you for all the support on the Last of Us Part 2 video. I had a bunch of comments. It picked up some traction, which was really cool. Everyone in the comments was super respectful and so many kind words. Even the people that disagree with me were very respectful. We had some cool conversation in the comments, and I really enjoyed that. So thank you. For this video, if you want to put a comment down, what you agreed with, disagree with. Obviously, because of the nature of the video, I couldn't go into depth about everything for all the games. But if there's anything you want to know more about me, let me know. There's, I have more thoughts on all of them. But yeah, this is already pretty long, so I'll see you guys next time. Have a great day, and I'll see you guys later.